में नीचे फर्स्ट सेकंड थर्ड फोर्थ स्क्रीन, 2 स्क्रीन बनी हुई हैं, उसी पे क्लिक करिए।
Now it has come. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, fine. So can you see my slides?
Yes,
Tina,
ma'am.
दिख रही है?
Yes, ma'am. Introduction is visible.
So fetal growth restriction is an important topic because it's an important cause of perinatal morbidity and mortality, and it's also important from the perspective of your examination. The definition of fetal growth restriction is that fetus has not achieved its genetic growth potential. So how do we know genetic growth potential? We have no objective criteria to know any growth potential of any fetus. So what we do in clinical practice, we use estimated fetal weight as an proxy for the growth potential. And when the estimated fetal weight is less than 10 centile or less than 2 standard deviation for that gestational age, we make the diagnosis of a small for gestational age, which is used as a proxy for fetal growth restriction. So overall, all small for gestational age fetuses have poor outcomes. However, we need to remember that the SGA, that is weight less than 10 centile or 2 standard deviation, what we use is an proxy. All SGAs are not fetal growth restriction. Some of them may be constitutionally small, and all fetal growth restricted babies may not be small for gestational age. So just have a look at this graph. You can see the graph on the right side of the graph. You see the 0 standard deviation, +2 and -2. So in this range, we get the babies who are average for gestational age. If the baby is below 2 standard deviation, as you see in these lower two graphs, they are called SGA. Now focus on these two graphs which are in the range, lines which are in the range of a SGA. First is a solid line in which if you look in the beginning of the graph, the x-axis is gestation, y-axis is the fetal weight. And so at the beginning of a gestation, the baby fetus is in the normal range, or that is the yellow, that is the white part of a graph that we are seeing. So it means it's a genetic potential of this fetus is in a normal range. But as the fetus grows, you can see the fetus is initially for some time in white line, and later on the growth is faltering. So this is the baby who has not achieved his genetic potential at birth and is called as a growth restricted fetus. Whereas the second baby which you see, which is the dotted line, see the genetic potential of the baby at the time of conception, it's below the white part of the graph. It means it's a normally small baby, and if we follow this graph further, we see it's following the normal growth trajectory without any flattening of the curve. So both these babies are small for gestational age, that is a weight less than 10 centile, but one is a growth restricted fetus and another is a normal small baby. Now you see third line which is in the white part of this graph, where you see the baby is falling into a group of an average gestational age. Okay, this baby. But if you trace this graph below, in the beginning of the graph, you see what is the growth potential of this baby. It's closer to this +2 standard deviation. But as fetus grows in intrauterine, it is coming between 0 and 2 standard deviation. It means this baby, even if it's average for gestational age, has not achieved its genetic growth potential. So one baby is a small for gestational age plus growth restricted. Second is growth restricted but not small for gestational age. And third baby is a small for gestational age and not growth restricted. So the constitutionally small baby. So to summarize, a small for gestational age baby, which we define by the estimated fetal weight for the gestation, can be growth restricted or can be constitutionally small. It is important to remember this differentiation because the morbidity will depend on which category the baby falls into. So next, coming to the etiology. Theoretically, we categorize the etiology into maternal, placental and fetal. However, in clinical practice, this is not an watertight compartment. You will see many areas where there are common factors. The medical conditions like a preeclampsia, though it's a maternal factor, it may act through the placental changes also. In the same way, if you get a fetal infection like a toxoplasmosis, it will act on the fetus also, and it will also act through the placenta. So there may be an overlap between the etiological factors. So when we evaluate the patient clinically, we need to look for all the factors. And in spite of all our efforts, there will be a category where you will not be able to find any cause, which we consider it as an idiopathic. Next, coming to the diagnosis. So diagnosis, as you can make out, our definition is estimated fetal weight appropriate to the gestational age. So establishing accurate gestational age remains the key of diagnosis of fetal growth restriction. And estimated accurate assessment of gestational age can be done either by a patient's history, by unreliable dates, regular cycles, regular menstrual cycles, and patient knowing the date correctly. Or a better way is to do it by an ultrasound, which is done in the first trimester, which has got an accuracy of around plus minus 3 days. If she doesn't have a dating scan in first trimester, then we use the second trimester, where the error goes to as high as around 10 days. And in the third trimester, it can be as high as 2 weeks. So for an accurate dating of a pregnancy, you need an ultrasound in the first trimester. And if that also matches with the patient's history, we call it as an excellent age. So establishing gestational age is the most important prerequisites. And then you have to go into the details of what are the risk factors present in a patient for the occurrence of a growth restriction. These are the various risk factors listed. There are many risk factors, and we know the etiology maternal, fetal, placental. So we look for all those risk factors. Then you should also ask for history of a smoking, alcohol, drug abuse, poor gestational weight gain. On clinical examination, if mother is small, the baby is likely to be constitutional small. If mother is undernourished, the baby is more likely to be SGA. So you may get some clue as to possible cause. Then on other general examination, we look for any evidence of a hypertension, presence of anemia, evidence of a chronic disease like a lymphadenopathy. On per abdominal examination, fundal height will be height of uterus less than period of gestation, and your estimated fetal weight, which as a clinician we do it by an subjective assessment, will be less, and the liquor also will be felt less. So the two important aspects which help us in diagnosing fetal growth restriction is abdominal palpation. One is an subjective palpation as to what is height of uterus. Second is an objective measurement of a symphysiofundal height. Measuring symphysiofundal height from the uterine fundus to symphysio-pubis with a measuring tape is one of the objective ways. Though it's not very sensitive and detects less than 25% gestational SGA babies, it is generally recommended because it is a simple test which can be done by any setup, by even done by a paramedical person. It's a low cost, and so the serial symphysio measurement should be done from 22 to 24 weeks, and we should plot them on the graph. The second modality which we use to diagnose SGA is the ultrasound. In ultrasound, again, we have two parameters. One is in fetal biometry, which means we measure biparietal diameter, we measure femur length, we measure abdominal circumference, and with all these measurements, computer calculates the estimated fetal weight, and this fetal weight we chart on the growth chart for that particular period of gestation. The second modality on ultrasound that can be used is an Doppler ultrasound. What Doppler does, Doppler detects the hemodynamic changes which occur in a fetus. If there is a factor which causes stress to the fetus or is likely to cause a growth restriction, the fetus will respond to that stress, and that will be manifesting in the Doppler changes. What are the different Dopplers we use? We use first is an uterine artery Doppler. Uterine artery Doppler of the maternal abdomen usually tells us about the tropoplasmic reaction of the uterus. So it tells the maternal part of the hemodynamic status. If there is a severe placental disease, it will ultimately result in reduction of a flow through umbilical artery. So that will cause the reduced supply to the fetus. If there is further reduction, the fetus will respond to this reduced blood flow, and the first change that occur in fetal circulation is the centralization of a flow, because brain being the most important organ, the flow is prioritized to the brain, and it results in centralization of a flow. And when there is further hypoxia or a reduction in blood flow, that can result in systemic cardiovascular response. And this we measure by a Doppler into the ductus venosus. So we measure two Dopplers, three Dopplers. One is a maternal Doppler, which measuring the uterine artery. Placental Doppler measures the umbilical artery, and the fetal response is measured by the fetal Dopplers. First line is a middle cerebral. If that is abnormal, we move on to ductus venosus. We will further see how we use this Doppler in clinical practice. So now coming to the differentiating normal small and fetal growth restricted babies. One is an estimated fetal weight, as we discussed in the beginning in the first slide only, how to differentiate. So any fetus which is below the third centile, our definition for growth restriction is fetal weight below the 10th centile. So, but closer to 10th centile, it can be constitutional babies. But by and large, if the estimated fetal weight is less than third centile, it is more likely to be growth restriction. Or there is a slowing or flattening of a curve. It's usually gives us the idea that the fetus is not growing appropriately, and then there is an increase in head circumference by abdominal circumference ratio. Abdominal circumference is significantly affected by the liver and the fat deposition in the liver. So any undernutrition of the fetus will usually manifest by reduction in the abdominal circumference. The another modality which we help us in differentiating a constitutionally small and a growth restricted baby is a Doppler changes. If the baby is constitutionally small, it will not be subjected to any stress, and so there will not be any adaptation, so no Doppler changes. So if you see any abnormality in Doppler changes, it suggests that there is an hemodynamic redistribution, which is the reflection of a fetal adaptation to abnormal environment. So we differentiate a normal small from or a constitutionally small from a growth restricted fetus by the extremes of a reduction in estimated fetal weight, flattening of growth curves, and abnormalities of Doppler, which are seen in growth restricted fetus. So coming to the classification, initially in our older time, we used to classify it into an asymmetric and symmetric. But now the classification is based on the time of onset of the growth restriction. If the growth restriction starts before 32 weeks of gestation, we call it early onset. If it starts after 32 weeks, we call it late onset. Why we are classifying it like it? Because there are significant pathophysiological and clinical differences between these two types of fetal growth restriction. Coming to the early onset fetal growth restriction occurs less commonly, but is associated with higher morbidity, whereas late onset is more common, but associated with a lesser morbidities. So in early onset fetal growth restriction, the placental disease is severe. So umbilical artery Dopplers may be abnormal. It's very commonly associated with diseases like a preeclampsia or an cyanotic heart disease in the mother. Whereas in a late onset fetal growth restriction, placental disease is mild. Your umbilical artery Doppler, which is the main Doppler which we use for diagnosis and management, may be normal. And there is a low association with the maternal diseases like preeclampsia. In case of an early onset Doppler, the fetus has gotten significant hypoxia, which results in systemic cardiovascular adaptation. Whereas in case of a late onset, because it's a milder disease, fetal hypoxia may or may not present. And what we see in clinical practice is only the centralization of a blood flow, that is the central cardiovascular adaptation. You see the brain's circulation to brain maintained, and other organs may be a little bit compromised, but there is no significant hypoxia. In case of an early onset, because it starts early, the fetus is immature, and because the course of a disease, natural course of a disease is long, the fetus has enough time to adjust to the hypoxia, and so it has high tolerance to hypoxia. Whereas in the late onset, what happens, the fetus is mature, but it has never exposed to the hypoxia, and so the short history of a natural disease is very slow. So this fetus is more fragile and more likely to result in intrauterine death, because it is not acclimatized to the hypoxia. So the early onset fetal growth restriction is low prevalence, but it has a higher morbidity mortality. And in case of a late onset, it's a lower morbidity mortality, but it affects a more number of pregnancies. The diagnosis is quite easy in early onset because it manifests early. It's a longer duration. But the problem is how to manage, because you have a problem of a prematurity and difficult to take a decision when to deliver these babies. Whereas in case of a late onset FGR, because it's a milder disease, many times we can miss the clinical diagnosis. But since this fetus is not acclimatized and has a lower tolerance to hypoxia, intrauterine deaths can occur. So we know that it's important to differentiate between early and late onset fetal growth restriction, because their severity, morbidity, mortalities are different. So we'll take this one example of a patient. So this is a patient who is a 24-year Gravida 2 Para 1 Live 1 at 34 and 4 weeks gestation. She has come to us for routine antenatal checkup. No complaints. Her previous was a full-term normal delivery, 2.8 kg baby. She had excellent dates and her period of gestation, and so we had no doubts about the dates. When we do the examination, what we find, there is nothing abnormal in general systemic examination, average height, average BMI. On per abdominal examination, uterus is 32 weeks size, and cephalic not engaged, Leica is adequate. So all the findings are similar except for height of uterus less than period of gestation. So height of uterus less than period of gestation, we need to keep different etiologies, causes in mind, commonest being the wrong dates. But that is ruled out in this patient because she had an excellent dates and had even the first trimester ultrasound. Then other causes can be an fetal growth restriction, it can be constitutionally small baby, it can be intrauterine death, it can be oligohydramnios. And as we go further, we need to evaluate for these causes. Her routine investigations were normal. She had anomaly scan, which was normal. So overtly, there is no gross fetal cause. Her gestational weight gain is 8 kg. So this is one of the indicators of an uteroplacental insufficiency and the IF, fetal growth restriction. So when we do the ultrasound for this fetus, what we see? It's a single live fetus, cephalic presentation, fundal placenta, and the amniotic fluid volume is normal. The biparietal diameter, head circumference, femur length are 33 weeks. Remember, and I told you, when we do a scan in the third trimester, there can be an error of around 2 weeks when we do the estimated fetal weight or when we do the biometry. So we don't rely much only on one parameter. The abdominal circumference is less than period of gestation, significant difference. And the estimated fetal weight calculated is 1.7 kg, which is 10 centile. So what does this tells you? This tells us that this baby is small for the gestational age. We do not know whether it's a constitutionally small baby or whether it's a growth restricted baby. So now we move further, and what we do this is her growth chart. This baby, in the weight at 26 weeks, the estimated fetal weight was somewhere around 25th centile. But as pregnancy progressed, you see at 34 weeks, it has come down below the 10th centile. So this is then definitely a growth restricted baby from the growth chart. And this is further confirmed by the Doppler. So what we did a Doppler. The umbilical artery pulsatility index is 1.15, which is at 90th centile. So if the pulsatility index of umbilical artery is increased, is reduced below 90th centile, and the middle cerebral artery is less than 5th centile. The ductus venosus flow is normally not done when the MCA PI is slightly in the normal range. So what we make, there are Doppler changes, there is a growth faltering. So we make the diagnosis of a fetal growth restriction. Now, why this is late onset? Because this fetal growth restriction, if you look at the chart, has started at after 32 weeks. So this is the late onset fetal growth restriction. Now, coming to what can we do now? Is there any treatment which will improve the growth of the fetus? There are all modalities tried: bed rest in the left lateral position, high protein diet, hydration therapy, antioxidants, vitamin B, progesterone. All these modalities have tried. Sildenafil is also being tried because it's a vasodilator, with the hypothesis that it will improve the placental circulation, but it is not yet proved to be beneficial. So as it stands today, we have no evidence to support that any intervention given medically to the mother is likely to improve the fetal growth. So there is no evidence to support any intervention. Now, what do we do? So the treatment of a fetal growth restriction is, as soon as the fetus is mature, we need to deliver the baby so that there are no problems with the fetus. But till that time, we need to monitor the baby and decide what time should we deliver the fetus, because we do not want the fetus to be preterm. So how does clinical monitoring is done? Clinical monitoring is, as we know, is done by the measuring symphysiofundal height, and which is plotted on this graph. These are the standard charts obtained given by WHO, and we plot the charts, and if it goes below this third centile, we call it a 10th centile is this line, and the third centile is this red line. So the charts are serially plotted, and it tells us now how is the fetal growth trajectory. Then we do the biometry, where the growth chart, where we measure biparietal diameter, head circumference, abdominal circumference, femur length, and it should be done at the interval of 3 to 4 weeks. Doing it more frequently doesn't help. An important indicator of a placental function is amount of an amniotic fluid. So the single deepest vertical pocket is better than amniotic fluid index, and that can be used. And then sometimes we monitor the babies with a biophysical profile, but this should not be used alone. It should be interpreted in the overall clinical picture. Then Doppler monitoring is done 2 weekly till the Dopplers are normal. But once you see the abnormalities and Doppler, then the frequency of Doppler monitoring has to be increased to twice a week. What are the Dopplers we do? We don't do uterine artery Doppler for monitoring of the fetus, because that is done only in the first or second trimester for prediction of fetal growth restriction or preeclampsia, not for the fetal monitoring. For fetal monitoring, we do umbilical artery Doppler, which shows the placental circulation. We do middle cerebral artery Doppler, which shows how fetus is responding to it. And at some stage later, we can do the ductus venosus. We'll see that protocol further. Then cerebroplacental ratio, that is the ratio of a cerebral impact, that is the fetal middle cerebral artery pulsatility index divided by the umbilical artery PI. If the value is less than 1, it is supposed to be associated with the adverse outcome. So this is the one early indicator of an systemic response into the fetus, and so we use this for monitoring. Then cardiotocography is a part of biophysical profile, and it can be used when there are the Dopplers are abnormal and when we are closer to the term, when we want to time the delivery. In CTG also, we have a lot of interpersonal variation in interpretation, and so there is evidence that computerized CTG improves the outcome. However, in India, we do not have the computerized CTG. Even CTG, many centers in India may not have this facility to have CTG for all FGR fetuses. So coming to the Doppler, how does Doppler you help us in making the decision? The first vessel to get affected is an umbilical artery. Once the umbilical artery circulation is affected and the fetus is a response to that stress, there are the changes in the cerebral artery, middle cerebral artery. And this is how it goes sequentially: umbilical artery Doppler, then middle cerebral artery Doppler, then ductus venosus Doppler, and how these Doppler changes progress in a sequential pattern. This is how the umbilical artery Doppler looks. This is just for an your orientation. This is an systolic flow, and this is an diastolic flow. You can see in the next flow B, there is a reduction in the diastolic flow. So there is a compromise of the blood circulation into the umbilical artery. In this third part of the graph, that is graph C, there is no diastolic flow. So it means there further progressive hypoxia which is occurring in the fetus, and this is the reversal of a flow, that is the most severe form. So when there is an absent or a reversed end diastolic flow, after this normally the changes in ductus venosus are seen, and then after this time when the umbilical artery Doppler shows absence or reversal of a diastolic flow, we start monitoring the fetus with the ductus venosus. So coming to the treatment is an delivery, because the fetus is not getting adequate nutrition inside and is an hostile in the environment. But the most critical task we have is, if we deliver the early, baby will have problems with prematurity. If we keep the baby inside, there is a risk of a IUD. So optimal timing is the most difficult exercise which we need to do, which is more difficult in the early onset FGR. The recommended timing is 37 weeks if everything remains normal, but it may to be pregnancy may need to be terminated earlier if there is indication either fetal, like you see absence or a reverse of end diastolic flow, or mother has a problem like a severe preeclampsia which needs early delivery. And when we need a delivery, very preterm delivery, it is recommended that we should give magnesium sulfate for the neuroprotection. It is recommended if delivery is occurring before 30 to 32 weeks of gestation, which reduces the incidence of cerebral palsy in the neonate. Another important decision we need to make is how to deliver this baby. Should we deliver her vaginally, induce the labor and deliver vaginally, or should we do the cesarean? The indication for cesarean is absence or reversed end diastolic flow, or obstetric indications like say breech presentation, transverse lie, etc. So this is a brief summary of a management of a fetal growth restriction. Based on a severity of a fetal growth restriction, we classify them into stages. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. Stage 1 is the mild disease, that is the baby may be the less than third centile. The Dopplers are affected, but still their end diastolic flow is present. And in this situation, we monitor the fetus weekly and we terminate the pregnancy at 37 weeks by induction of labor and vaginal delivery is attempted. That doesn't mean that patient will always deliver vaginally, but at least we can try delivering her vaginally. In the stage 2, there is a severe placental insufficiency as demonstrated by the absence of end diastolic flow in the umbilical artery. So once you see these changes, we monitor the patient Dopplers bi-weekly, and by 34 weeks the fetus is delivered, and the recommendation here is to deliver them by a cesarean section because the baby is now so hypoxic that it may not be able to take the stress of normal labor. Then stage 3 and stage 4 are again severe, where there is a suspected fetal acidosis, where we need to monitor the patient every day or even twice a day. And in both these situations, as soon as you see the changes in ductus venosus or your biophysical profile is abnormal, we deliver the baby. But again, here in these situations where we deliver the baby very preterm, we need to take two precautions. One is giving magnesium sulfate. Number two, check with your nursery. If the baby is at 26 weeks, there is no bed in nursery, or your nursery says, no, madam, we cannot salvage 26 weeks baby, then do not do the cesarean. Inform the patient. You can transfer the patient to a facility where the facility to take care of a 26 baby is there. So this timing and a modality of a cesarean or mode of delivery will depend on the institutional facility and what patient wants. So what we did in our patient, our patient was in primigravida at 34 plus 4 weeks with late onset IUGR. She was monitored by a Doppler. Her umbilical artery Doppler remained normal with centralization of a flow. There was slight reduction of a middle cerebral artery pulsatility index, but it was within normal range. And so she was induced at 37 weeks and delivered vaginally a boy measuring 2.32. The Apgar score was good, the baby mother side, and discharged home normally. So what are the problems of fetal growth restriction? Fetal growth restriction is associated with increased perinatal morbidity and mortality. And the problem can occur antepartum. There can be an intrauterine fetal death. It can occur intrapartum problems like increased risk of meconium stained liquor, fetal distress, or even the intrapartum stillbirth can occur. Postpartum, the babies who are fetally growth restricted after birth are at higher risk of birth asphyxia and hypoxic ischemic encephalopathies, or their tolerance is less. They can have a meconium aspiration. They are more susceptible to hypothermia, hypoglycemia, and neonatal sepsis. And problem doesn't end in postpartum period. Even in the late age, this is the adult onset diseases also have their seeds in the intrauterine life, and there is an adverse neurodevelopmental outcomes in childhood, and long term these babies are more prone to cardiovascular diseases like hypertension, atherosclerosis, diabetes mellitus type 2. So all growth restricted babies should be monitored for these problems. Now we come to another case example. This was a low-risk patient, second gravida, para 1, live 1, at say almost term 39-40 weeks, who came to our antenatal OPD. On general examination, everything was fine. Uterus was term size, cephalic fixed, uterus was relaxed. NST was done, it was reactive. So the doctor on duty thought everything is fine. She's very close to term. She will go in spontaneous labor. Head also is fixed. So she was asked to come after 1 week for admission. The patient comes back same day night with labor pains, and on examination what we found, there was no fetal heart, and this was also confirmed by ultrasound. The cervix was soft, partially effaced 2 centimeters, pelvis adequate. Patient went into spontaneous labor, had vaginal delivery. It was a fresh stillbirth baby. And what was the baby weight? It was 2.3 kg. There was no anomaly, and the placenta was grossly normal. So what has happened? We went again back to the case sheets. She was a booked case, had 10 antenatal visits, excellent dates, had 2 scans which were normal, and all clinical examination in all antenatal visits were normal. So what has happened? We had missed the late onset fetal growth restriction. And that's why, and we all know that late onset FGR babies are more prone to intrauterine death as there is no tolerance to the hypoxia. So undetected fetal growth restriction is a common problem, and about 3/4 of these are not diagnosed before the delivery. And this is one of the causes which we consider as an unexplained stillbirth, because in a peripheral setup, if the unexplained stillbirth occurs, there may not be many times the fetal weight also is not measured, but it's a very common cause for unexplained stillbirth in low risk pregnancy, and it contributes to around 43 to 52% of stillbirths. We have already seen that late onset fetal growth restriction is prone to sudden death than early onset. There is low tolerance of a term fetus to hypoxia. There are frequent uterine contractions in late pregnancy Braxton Hicks, which to some extent compromise the circulation. And placenta is also an organ which goes apoptosis, and there is a decline in a placental function closer to the term. So antenatal detection of a small fetuses, whether SGA or growth restricted both, reduces the adverse perinatal outcomes and stillbirths, and we should make all the efforts that we diagnose the smaller babies antenatally and take appropriate monitoring so that there is no stillbirth. Now, how can we do that? How can we screen for a FGR or SGA? One is in clinical screening. We can screen with the risk factors. We all know the risk factors. Then we can do the serial symphysiofundal height measurement. Then are there some biochemical markers? There are some markers which we use for aneuploidy screening, which give us some indicator as to placental function also. Then ultrasound, we can do the biometry as well as Dopplers. And then, any one modality is not sensitive enough to be used as a screening test. So we can make the permutation combination of different tests available, and there are various prediction models designed. So moving to the risk factors. It is recommended that risk factors are by and large the history based. So we should screen all pregnant patients with the risk factors at the time of booking and at 24 to 28 weeks, because some risk factors may appear evolved during the pregnancy. Now, every risk factor has a quantum of a risk associated for the fetal growth restriction. You don't need to go into the details, but these are the overall factors like a previous small for gestational age baby, previous stillbirth, a woman with a renal disease, antiphospholipid antibody, low maternal weight gain, unexplained antepartum hemorrhage, severe preeclampsia. These are the factors which are very major and associated with an odds ratio, very high odds ratio of developing fetal growth restriction. So women who have a major risk factor, that is when the odds ratio is more than 2, should have a serial growth scan for the early detection of a fetal growth restriction. And for women who have a minor factors, which I have not listed because there are many, so for those we should screen, you can screen them with an umbilical artery Doppler at 20, and uterine artery Doppler at 20 weeks, and then the serial growth scan if it is abnormal. So this is one of the model which is recommended by RCOG. Of course, we need to understand that everything RCOG recommends cannot be followed in India, especially in all Indian setups. So for Indian scenario, what we use only is the risk factor history-based screening and the symphysiofundal height measurement. Serial measurement of symphysiofundal height at each antenatal visit and plotting it on a graph. Very important is plotting it on the graph. Unless you plot it on the graph, you cannot by hand remember that what should be the height at what period of gestation. You all know how we measure the symphysiofundal height. It should be correctly measured and it should be plotted on the graph. And even if this method is not very, very sensitive, it detects quite a number of significant fetal growth restricted fetuses. It's a simple, it can be done in any setup, and it can be taught to any healthcare provider, so it is recommended. So in all low resource setting, history-based screening and symphysiofundal height measurement is recommended. Then we come to the different prediction models. These prediction models are based on maternal characteristics, which we get on history. Then you have a biochemical marker, a biophysical marker like measurement of a mean arterial pressure. Then you have an umbilical artery Doppler, uterine artery Doppler, which can be done in first trimester or second trimester. And the biochemical markers like PLGA, PAP-A, which are mainly used for an aneuploidy screening. But when you make a computerized prediction model using these different characteristics, we can detect, and some of the models have a detection rate of as high as 86% for early onset fetal growth restriction. However, this is a very complex procedure. You need the facilities. If you don't have a facility for markers for only these three, how does it work? So we need further studies as to cost benefit ratios of the different prediction models and how they work in different settings. The third one is, if we do one scan in third trimester, will it help us in detecting the detecting the fetal growth restriction, because our clinical assessment is not so accurate. So there are many studies which are being conducted till now, but till now, as it seems that a single third trimester scan in an unselected population does not improve the outcome. There are, if you do an indicated selective scan in a high risk patient or an indicated high risk patient found high risk by your previous screening methods like history or a symphysiofundal height, it is probably benefit. So at this point of time, there is no evidence that routine third trimester ultrasound is beneficial. And for a country like ours, we really need to look at it from the perspective of a logistics. Can we really provide it to all the patients? The Government of India guideline at this point recommends only a single ultrasound at 18 to 20 weeks of gestation, which gives us good dating as well as ruling out the major anomalies. So government does not provide for the third trimester scan. So, and if you do a scan and if you do the risk-based screening and find that your patient is at a high risk of a fetal growth restriction, can we do something about it? Yes. So we have now evidence that if we start the low dose aspirin at or before 16 weeks of gestation, it is associated with significant reduction in the prevalence of a fetal growth restriction in high risk patient. And the dose of aspirin recommended is around 100 to 160. The standard dose which is recommended is 150 aspirin per day, taken at bedtime or at least 8 hours before getting up in the morning. This is an aspirate trial which was done, which has found that it reduces the incidence of a fetal growth restriction quite significantly, and so it can be done. So we can, so our strategy in an Indian scenario will be identify the patients who are at high risk based on their history, and especially patient has a previous fetal growth restriction, patient has a preeclampsia or a chronic hypertension in this pregnancy. Remember, this aspirin has to be started early to get the effects. And if we start it late, it may not be effective because aspirin is supposed to affect the trophoblastic invasion, which occurs in the second phase. So we should do a good history-based screening in first trimester to find out the risk factors and start the aspirin, which may reduce the risk of a fetal growth restriction. So just to summarize what we have learned till now, fetal growth restriction is defined as a failure to achieve the genetic growth potential. And before we come to the summary, if anybody has any questions, please put your questions. I will discuss it after we finish the summary. So FGR is defined as a failure to achieve genetic growth potential of the fetus. The distinction between small and fetal growth restriction should be based on the growth below third centile Doppler changes. But we need to keep in mind that even a normal small baby may have an adverse outcome. The fetal growth restriction is classified early and late fetal growth restriction depending on the onset, and the cutoff level that is used is 32 weeks. The challenging aspect is diagnosis in the late fetal growth restriction, whereas in early fetal growth restriction, it is the timing of delivery because the big concern for the premature. The treatment of a cause, if woman has a preeclampsia or a chronic hypertension, control of her hypertension, appropriate monitoring and timely delivery. guided by the management protocol. We have seen the different stages and severity of protocol, and based on that, if we follow the protocol, that improves the outcome. The prediction of fetal growth restriction using risk factors, ultrasound Doppler, and aspirin started earlier can reduce the risk of fetal growth restriction in high risk cases. Then there are some fetal causes for fetal growth restriction. They are not very common, but when present, like in congenital anomalies, especially the chromosomal abnormalities or in fetal infections, they need to be individualized, managed according to cause and a multidisciplinary input. If there is a genetic cause like a chromosomal anomaly, we need to keep the geneticist in our team so as to decide what is the risk of recurrence in subsequent pregnancies. So any questions? In exam, you usually get a short note on a fetal growth restriction. Long question is little unusual, but sometimes it can come as a height of uterus less than period of gestation, but more commonly you will get a short note. In practical, this can definitely come as a long case, so you should know well about the all the points, because your viva can go in any direction. So it can be long case as a height of uterus less than period of gestation. On your table vivas, if you get an ultrasound films or something, you may be asked about the fetal growth restriction. Then when you have an viva on drugs regarding induction of labor like Serviprime, one of the common indication for induction of labor is fetal growth restriction, and at that point you will be asked questions on the fetal growth restrictions. So are there any questions? Let me check your checkbox. So I don't see any question in the chat box. So should we close the class? Just put your answer in the chat box. If there are no questions, we will close the class here.
Any questions?
So thank you.
Ma'am, there are no questions. I don't think.
Okay. So since there are no questions, we close the class. Ina, just take out their attendance.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ma'am, there is one question. Ma'am, please explain again the changes in fetal circulation after umbilical artery.
Okay, fine. Changes in fetal circulation. Okay, we'll.
अभी delete करना.
Just give me 1 second. I'm going back to the slides. See, one thing I would like to tell you that at your level, you should only remember that it's the Doppler changes which decide the timing of delivery. You don't really need to go into the very much details of Doppler changes. It will not be asked, but for understanding the pathophysiology of a fetal growth restriction, you need to remember that the fetus gets its full circulation from the mother. So any changes in the maternal pathophysiology we detected by the uterine artery Doppler. So that is the main source of blood flow to the placenta. So the uterine artery Doppler usually decides the placentation, and the placentation then it occurs in first and second trimester. So uterine artery Doppler is important more in the first and second trimester to predict as to how is the placentation and how is it going to behave later on. Usually in third trimester, we do not do the uterine artery Doppler. What we do in case of a fetal growth restriction, the Dopplers which we use for fetal monitoring are the fetoplacental Dopplers. Means we use the Doppler of an umbilical artery. Umbilical artery brings the blood from placenta to the fetus. Middle cerebral artery, which shows the response of a fetus to the hypoxia. And ductus venosus, middle cerebral artery, shows the early response of fetus or the centralization of a flow, and ductus venosus shows the systemic response. So when we come to the umbilical artery, as I told you, the normal umbilical artery has a good flow both during systole and diastolic. because there is it's a placental circulation is a low resistance circulation. But whenever there is a vasospasm or a reduced circulation or a reduced blood flow to the fetus, first compromise occurs at the diastolic flow. So there is a reduction of a diastolic flow. If there is further reduction of a blood flow, what will happen? Systolic flow will still occur because the pressures are high, but there will not be any flow. That is the absence of a diastolic flow. And further, if there is a further reduction in the blood flow, there will be a reversal. That is, the venous flow will be reversed, which we see as a reversal of a flow. So the first vessel in the fetus which is affected is an umbilical artery pulsatility index. Then occurs the centralization of a flow and your cerebroplacental ratio will be decreased. What is cerebroplacental flow? It is the ratio of a fetal middle cerebral artery pulsatility index to the umbilical artery. So it means the cerebral blood flow is increasing as more blood is being flown into the fetal brain as a part of a umbilical artery. So that's the earliest sign of a compromise of a blood flow to the fetus. And further, then what next occurs will be an absence of a end reversal. And when there is a severe fetal hypoxia, it doesn't remain confined by the compromising only the cerebral blood flow. Then there is a systemic response to the fetus. There is a signs of acidosis, metabolic acidosis. And in that situation, the last blood vessel to be affected is the ductus venosus. So normally when we monitor the pregnancy, we monitor only with the umbilical artery and the middle cerebral artery. Ductus venosus is done only when here the umbilical artery shows reversal or absence of the blood flow. Is it clear now? Is it clear? Yes, okay. So any other question? So if there are no questions, now we close the class. Thank you.
Okay, should I close the class, ma'am?
Yeah, yeah.